starts with the boy, Patel. He was originally on a ship with his family of 3, immigrating to Canada. But one night, as the ship was passing over the deepest part of the ocean, Pi was jolted awake by a loud noise, while his family continued to sleep. Curious, he went to the deck to check, only to find the ship being battered by waves and on the verge of capsizing. Pi found a crew member nearby and asked what was happening. Before he could get an answer, he was shoved into a lifeboat. Before Pi could react, a zebra suddenly jumped down onto the lifeboat. In the blink of an eye, the small boat was swept away by the waves. Once Pi regained his footing, he saw that most of the ship had already sunk into the sea. At that moment, he noticed a figure in the distance. Pi quickly tossed a lifebuoy out, but as the figure drew closer, it turned out to be a tiger Richard Parker. The Richard leaped onto the small boat, and Pi, terrified, crawled to the stern, clinging to a wooden pole, surviving the night. At dawn, he noticed Richard was nowhere to be seen, leading to the scene at the beginning. Little did Pi know, Richard hadn't left. By nightfall, the hyena had fully adapted to the sea and its seasickness had subsided. Unable to reach Pi, it turned its attention to the injured zebra. Pi roared in protest but was powerless to stop the brutal scene, only able to watch in horror. To avoid being killed by the hyena, Pi retreated to the stern once again, surviving another night. By the next day, Pi, utterly exhausted, accidentally fell into the sea. He quickly woke up, looking toward the bow to find the zebra already dead, but the monkey had somehow survived. Pi knew he couldn't just sit there any longer. Thinking of the weapons on board, he mustered his courage and, while the hyena wasn't looking, found a survival manual in a locker. He skimmed through it and then crafted a makeshift lifeboat according to the instructions. He planned to temporarily leave the boat with the monkey, but the hyenas suddenly rushed out. To protect Pi, the monkey engaged in a fierce battle with the hyena. It knocked the hyena down with a punch, and Pi couldn't help but cheer.
Yes!
But within seconds, the hyena had grabbed the monkey by the throat, killing it on the spot. Seeing this, Pi was furious. He wanted to avenge the monkey.
Come on! Come on!
Unexpectedly, Richard appeared and swiftly killed the hyena. Pi was instantly terrified and hurriedly pushed the lifeboat into the sea, then jumped off the small boat. Fortunately, Richard, the king of the jungle, was also hesitant to enter the water. Thus, Pi was temporarily safe on his lifeboat. Who knows how long passed before Pi, while Richard was asleep, sneaked back onto the boat and found several cans of food. He transferred some of the food to the raft. Starving, Pi immediately opened a biscuit and began eating. Despite the danger, at that moment, Pi discovered a rat on the boat, but its squeaks woke the sleeping Richard. Richard tried to eat Pi, but his clumsy movements prevented him from crossing over. Thinking he was safe, Pi suddenly saw Richard change tactics. In a moment of desperation, Pi grabbed the rat on him and threw it into Richard's mouth, then quickly jumped back onto the raft. Since there was still the zebra's carcass on the boat, Richard temporarily spared Pi. That night, Richard stood at the edge of the boat, staring intently at his prey. Pi burst into tears. If he stayed away from the boat, he couldn't get the food stored there. If he didn't leave, he'd eventually be eaten by the starving Richard. After a night of contemplation, Pi made a bold decision. He was going to tame Richard, following the instructions from the manual. The first step was to choose a calm day, position the lifeboat against the wind, making it as stable and comfortable as possible, and then blow a whistle. The second step was to turn the boat sideways to the waves and keep blowing the whistle. This way, Richard would associate the sound with seasickness and discomfort. But the most crucial step was yet to come. Pi gathered his courage and urinated on the boat to mark his territory.
You understand?
But Richard didn't react. Instead, he seemed to mock Pi's actions. Even though these risky steps didn't work, Pi didn't give up. He even started sharing the fresh water he'd collected with Richard and tried using biscuits to fish. All this was done to ensure his survival, as Richard needed about 5 pounds of meat daily, and if he got too hungry, it attacked Pi. But despite days and nights of trying, Pi had no luck catching any fish. Finally, the thing Pi feared most happened. One day, Richard, unable to bear his hunger any longer, jumped into the sea. Pi was stunned with fear. The clumsy Richard can't catch a fish at all. Pi, watching from the side, couldn't help but laugh at his awkward attempts. But his laughter didn't last long because Richard soon set his sights on him and started swimming toward him. Terrified, Pi quickly pulled on the rope, jumped onto the small boat just before Richard could reach him, and then hoisted the raft onto the boat, leaving Richard stranded in the water. Richard was now like a lamb to the slaughter in the sea. Pi raised an axe, ready to end Richard's life. But just then, Richard suddenly acted cute. Never having killed before, Pi hesitated, and after a long moment of indecision, he couldn't bring himself to do it. As night fell, Richard had been soaking in the sea for a day. To prevent Richard from dying in the water, Pi transferred all the food from the boat to the raft and then pushed the raft back into the sea. Little did he know that this act would be something he'd regret. He then lowered a plank, allowing Richard to climb onto the small boat while he returned to the raft. And so, Man and Tiger continued their journey adrift at sea. One day, Pi suddenly noticed a large fish swimming into his net. He quickly grabbed it and then struck it repeatedly with a hammer until it was lifeless, its body turning from green to gray. Pi shed sad tears, because this was the first time he had killed anything, and Pi was a vegetarian who had never eaten meat before. He threw the entire fish to Richard. That night, the sea was filled with glowing jellyfish, a scene of breathtaking beauty. Like a curious child, Pi reached into the sea, happily swishing his hand through the water, but he was unaware that behind the beauty lay danger. A whale suddenly breached the surface, its massive body causing waves that flipped the entire raft. Pi's survival biscuits were all lost to the sea. He regretted moving all the food to the raft, but it was too late. Hunger is a terrifying thing. It can completely change a person. Pi mustered his courage, climbed onto the small boat, and Richard, thinking his meal had arrived, prepared to attack. But then, a small fish suddenly slapped Pi in the face. As Man and Tiger were both momentarily stunned, a massive school of fish appeared, flying toward them. At that moment, a tuna suddenly jumped onto the boat. As Richard prepared to eat it, Pi knew he couldn't show weakness. He grabbed a stick and shoved it into Richard's mouth. Startled by Pi's fierce stance, Richard backed off and obediently ate the smaller fish that had landed on the boat. That night, after cleaning the tuna, Pi ate it voraciously. Having enough food wasn't enough. Pi knew that to survive, he had to tame Richard. So, he bravely climbed onto the small boat and started training Richard with the stick. No! Pi just shouted, and Richard was actually as obedient as a kitten. Pi then took out a piece of fish from his bag and offered it to Richard with the stick. To his surprise, after eating it, Richard, like a house pet, signaled for more. Seeing this, Pi tossed another piece to him. It seemed that Richard was now successfully tamed, but Pi still didn't let his guard down. He returned to the raft. Just then, a pod of dolphins appeared in the distance. Pi was thrilled because a ship was visible beyond the dolphins. He quickly fired a signal flare into the sky, hoping the ship would notice, but unfortunately, after firing 10 flares, only one was left, and the ship hadn't noticed the distress signal. Eventually, it faded from Pi's view. At that moment, he felt utterly hopeless. That night, Man and Tiger gazed up at the stars, wondering when this drift would end. Little did they know, the weather at sea could change in an instant. The once clear sky turned stormy, and the small boat was battered by waves, threatening to capsize at any moment. Pi, unwilling to give up, roared in anger at the sky.
I've lost everything! I've lost my family! I surrender! What more do you want?
Man and Tiger huddled in the boat's cabin, hoping the storm would pass quickly. Who knows how long it lasted? But finally, the sea calmed, but their previously stored food had been washed away. A month later, Pi was a shadow of his former self, and Richard was on the brink of death. Pi desperately drank a mouthful of seawater, but it didn't quench his thirst. Seeing the weakened Richard before him, Pi poured all the remaining water into Richard's mouth. Pi then treated it like a companion, lovingly holding it in his arms. Pi shed tears of frustration. After more than 100 days adrift, they couldn't hold on any longer, but when Pi awoke, he found they had drifted to an island. He quickly climbed ashore and, seeing the green vegetation before him, began devouring it. Not caring if it was poisonous, he was simply too hungry. After filling his stomach, he ventured further into the island. When he emerged from the forest, Pi was stunned. The island was teeming with meerkats, and around them were several water pools. The exhausted Pi jumped in, joyfully swimming around. The feeling of surviving was incredible, and Richard was even more excited. The island was an endless buffet. Pi found a place to tie the necklace his girlfriend had given him. With abundant food on the island, he considered staying there, but a looming danger quickly changed Pi's mind. At sunset, the meerkats seemed to sense danger, all climbing into the trees to hide, while Richard returned to the small boat. At first, Pi didn't pay much attention and continued playing with the little animals, but in the middle of the night, he discovered that the fish in the pools had all floated to the surface, dead. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the sweet, drinkable water from the day had turned into highly corrosive acid by nightfall. Pi picked a glowing flower, and when he opened it, he found a human tooth inside. Pi realized the island wasn't safe for long-term habitation, and his suspicion was confirmed. Looking out into the distance, the island's shape resembled that of a reclining woman. The next day, Pi gathered a large amount of food and water, then blew his whistle. To his surprise, Richard actually came running at the sound, and so, man and tiger set off on their journey once more. After countless days and nights, Pi finally drifted ashore. He was so exhausted that he could no longer stand, but Richard seemed in much better shape, even stretching lazily before heading toward the jungle. But when reached the edge of the forest, Richard stopped. Pi thought Richard might turn around to look at him, to say goodbye in some way, but Richard didn't look back and disappeared into the jungle. When Pi was finally rescued, he cried like a child. After 223 days together, Pi had developed a deep bond with Richard, but Richard left his life without even a farewell.